Good evening and welcome to the show, our final time together this year. But don't worry, after a break for Christmas, I'm all locked in to this network for 2025 and I cannot wait. We'll have some very exciting news to tell you about in the new year, so watch this space. But tonight, how did the New South Wales Premier end up being referred to ICAC in the shadows of 2024? I'll speak with independent MLC Mark Latham, who's been a key player in this shock decision. Our news panellists, Vikki, Campion and Malley, will talk about the government's appalling new economic scorecard, the PM's flower bill and the magistrate who dished out some old-fashioned advice to social media addicts. I'll speak with the author of a new book about what really goes on inside juvenile detention. It is not pretty. We'll tell you about the Aussie farmers who are still languishing in drought conditions. And we'll cross to the United States and hear about Tucker Carlson's role and influence in the Trump transition team. Corinne Cliford from Washington, D.C. So that's the mud map, and it all starts right now. You know, the more I follow what's happening in Western and Eastern Europe at the moment, the more I fear that we've not got our attention on the right war and that the region is quietly preparing for World War III. Talk of peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine is being frowned upon by the hawks at NATO. It wants to arm Kiev even more and keep the killing going before anyone talks peace. According to Newsweek, NATO's European members have already started laying the groundwork for a larger scale conflict. The German intelligence service is certain that Russia is preparing for war with the West as well. Now, NATO is still warning that Vladimir Putin will grab more land and move into Western Europe, which is pure fantasy. He can't even take Kiev. European Union military types are saying that a full-scale war will not commence for 5 or 6 years from now. Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Service was the first to make that claim at the beginning of this year. Now, the theory is that this will give both NATO and Russia time to bolster their defences and rebuild troop numbers and weaponry. Great. One thing the EU knows, with Donald Trump incoming, they can no longer rely on the United States for military muscle. So defence spending in Western Europe will need to increase in any case. The Newsweek team reports that countries snaking along NATO's eastern flank are already showing visible signs of preparations for war. The Serbian president has said NATO is already preparing for a conflict with the Russian Federation, preparing much faster than some people would like to see in every sense. That sounds ominous. A German daily newspaper reports the country has started putting together plans for how Berlin would shield infrastructure in the event of an attack. Can you imagine if it got to that? The German government has also said it's putting together a list of bomb shelters that will be available for its citizens. And listen to this, the 3 Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia have signed an agreement already this year to beef up protection along their land borders with Russia and Belarus. The Scandinavians, Sweden, Norway and Finland have all published brochures on how their residents need to learn how to prepare for and act in case of crisis or war. The pamphlets outline what a heightened state of alert would mean, how each inhabitant would pitch in to a wartime effort, and what different sirens sound like. Putin has updated Russia's nuclear doctrine, lowering the threshold required to launch nuclear warheads. The document now allows Moscow to unleash a nuclear strike if subject to an attack by a non-nuclear country, as long as that country has the support of a nuclear state. Again, an ominous scenario. None of this needs to be the way forward, none of it. Has the deadly history of world wars in Europe not taught these leaders anything at all? The Russian-Ukraine conflict is a territorial dispute dating back decades and should be treated as such. The world needs the incoming US president to shake some sense into NATO and bring both sides to the negotiation table pronto, because anything else is just too catastrophic to contemplate. Well, the New South Wales Premier has reacted angrily to a decision by a parliamentary committee to refer him to the state's corruption watchdog, ICAC. The shock referral has come from the Parliamentary Committee inquiring into the sale of Rose Hill Racecourse in Sydney's West to be redeveloped to build 25,000 homes. Now, it concerns his long-time friendship with one of the key figures behind the ATC project. His name is Steve McMahon. Chris Minns says the referral is disgraceful and based on completely unsubstantiated allegations. One of the committee members is independent MLC Mark Latham. He joins me now. Mark, thank you very much for your time. What are your main concerns here about the Premier's involvement? Was it done too quickly? Was it all a little in-house? What are your concerns?
Well, Chris, I've raised this repeatedly in the Parliament at budget estimates, including to the ICAC Chief Commissioner and at the Rose Hill Committee. And I can't talk about what's in the report tomorrow to be released at 10:30am, but I can say Chris Minns seems to have very little understanding of the nature of the ICAC ruling about Gladys Berejiklian, because that wasn't a financial benefit matter. ICAC found, and whether you agree with this standard or not, it's the standard that must now apply to all premiers, Liberal and Labor. ICAC found that a Premier can't, in the exercise of their public duties, have the potential, not even the actuality, the potential to maintain or further a close personal relationship. So it doesn't seem to be in dispute, and Chris Minns has not disputed this. He has a very close personal relationship with Steve McMahon, long-standing Labor allies, personal friends, supporters of each other, local councillors in the St George district, going back over decades. So that's not in dispute. So it would have been wise, and according to the Berejiklian ruling, for Chris Minns to declare a conflict of interest when Steve McMahon came to see him on the 30th of October last year, pushing this plan to have 25,000 new dwellings at Rose Hill instead of a racecourse. Also, Chris Minns would have known at that time why was the ATC sending Steve McMahon instead of its chair and its CEO. You know, you'd normally expect the leadership of an organisation for the biggest real estate deal in the state's history to be meeting with the Premier. He must have known that Steve McMahon was being sent because, as a good friend, he could exercise a stronger influence over the Premier, and that's what happened. Within moments, within a day. The Cabinet Office is assisting Steve McMahon with this, and on the 20th of November last year, Steve McMahon is writing a press release for Chris Minns announcing the sale before the board of the ATC has even known about it. And in that meeting on the 30th of October, there's no senior public servants present. And I can assure you from the evidence we've heard at the Rose Hill Committee that if the head of the planning department and Metro had been present, they could have cleared up some of the misapprehensions that Mr McMahon had about the scale of housing needed for a metro station, and the project probably wouldn't have gone ahead at all at that time. So I've listed today on Twitter 15 concerns about probity with Premier Chris Minns. I've been working on this for a long, long while. The evidence doesn't change, but the Premier's denial today, saying it was all unsubstantiated smears and all that, I'm afraid the guy is quite delusional.
Is it true that some 13 months ago, Investment New South Wales warned the Premier that it had limited information on this project, and yet the Premier was very gung-ho on it?
Well, the evidence from Investment New South Wales was quite embarrassing for the ATC, and I think also for Chris Minns, because they said that this project was proceeding with a map. It's sort of like a kindergarten-style hand-drawn map on the back of a beer coaster, about that size. Limited information as to what was involved, and no justification at that time for direct dealing, which is the unsolicited proposal that was ultimately proceeded with. So it was done quickly. It was done more as a Steve McMahon project than the ATC. The board didn't even know on the 30th of October this meeting was taking place, even though there was a board meeting. They didn't know until the 21st of November. There was no clear written valuation to say it was worth $5 billion. Minns didn't follow the ICAC guidelines to do due diligence on what he was involved in. There's a whole stack of probity concerns about this, and if the Berejiklian ruling is to have any meaning in New South Wales, there's every good reason for ICAC to investigate Minns, because I think his breaches are much worse than those of Gladys Berejiklian.
Could his very, very strong support for this project, Mark, be the fact that he was very keen to show his intent in helping to solve the state's housing crisis? Because 25,000 homes in the Parramatta district is one hell of a solution.
Well, the ICAC guidelines, and I think common sense would tell you, don't use direct dealing unless it's a last resort. Normally, if someone wants to build any amount of homes in New South Wales, we do have a thing called the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. It's called the law in New South Wales, and it's there for applicants to put their proposal forward and see if they can get their rezoning and their development consent. And the government was also talking about the possibility of a metro station there. So if Minns had had the senior public servants planning and metro at the meeting on the 30th of October, he could have said, well, the standard way we do this is you've got a desire to rezone. I want to introduce you to the planning secretary. Yeah. You want a metro station? Here's the guy who runs Sydney Metro. So if Minns thought it was appropriate to meet with McMahon and didn't want to declare a conflict of interest, at least he should have been going through the regular channels of government processes instead of this direct dealing through an unsolicited proposal that, quite frankly, was solicited by the government. That's another breach that we need to be worried about. Steve McMahon had never heard of an unsolicited proposal. The government gave it to him. They solicited what was going on here rather than the other way around.
It's a very odd way to do business. The Premier says, though, there is absolutely no evidence or even an attempt to quantify what rule, practice or procedure has been breached. He says this is an old-fashioned smear from a group of politicians opposed to changes at Rose Hill. Are you opposed to the sale, point blank?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ATC has got no financial justification. They're wanting to sell one racetrack to go and have to build two replacement ones. The absurdity at the Brick Pit, which will never happen, and also a new training facility at Horsley Park. So I'm an ATC member, I've declared that, and I think financially it doesn't stack up. And there's never been a valuation presented to the board, a credible valuation to say it's worth $5 billion and their finances are not going to sustain this project. And anyway, the membership are against it, Chris. There was this time last week, there was a vote on new directors at the ATC, and overwhelmingly the vote was for anti-sale candidates. So on every front, it doesn't stack up. If you want to have housing, there is a logical alternative at Rose Hill, because this sort of started with a thing called the Camellia Rose Hill Place strategy, and there's an option of a Dubai or Maiden style development there if they went ahead with a metro, knocking down the existing grandstand facilities at Rose Hill but keeping the racetrack. You could probably have 8,000 new dwellings, which is a massive development on Sydney's housing scale.
So you're not opposed to some kind of kind of compromise?
Well, yeah, I think that's the logical way for all these galahs to get out of it. Minns has gone through the wrong process with no probity standards at all and should be referred to ICAC. Racing New South Wales put up the Brick Pit, which is a joke. The ATC's never had the finances for this to stack up properly. So there is an alternative that provides some housing. 8,000 dwellings is a lot on Sydney's housing needs, a hell of a lot, actually. And the ATC can get a revenue stream out of that to fund some of these capital upgrades at Warwick Farm and Canterbury. And Minns would get some of the housing out of it. So if they'd done the due diligence and looked at these studies and looked at the viability, instead of rushing into it to help Steve McMahon, then they would have come up with a much better option than the debacle they've now got on their hands.
There'll be many chapters to come on this little story, and we'll keep across it. Mark, this is my last program. Thank you very much for your contribution to the show this year on ADH TV. We appreciate it. Have a great Christmas.
Thank you.
Good on you. Mark Latham, independent MLC, Upper House MP in the New South Wales Parliament. Back with more after this. It is time for our final news panel for 2024. Oh, I know, I feel the same way. And maybe we've left the best until last. Maybe. Joining us now from Sydney is best-selling author, CEO and disruptor Alex Malley. And from the Rocky Valley of Danglemar in the New England region of New South Wales, it's Daily Telegraph columnist Vikki Campion. Welcome to you both.
Thank you for having us.
All right, from the top of my show last night, I highlighted the rebounding NAPLAN results, which have come from the old-school direct learning approach in Catholic schools in the ACT and Goulburn Archdiocese. Indigenous leader Noel Pearson is on the same page today calling for direct instruction to be rolled out in every Australian school. Alex, it angers me that my older kids who have just left school were on the receiving end of inferior, novel teaching fads.
Absolutely, Chris, you're absolutely on the money on that. And as a parent of 7 and as a teacher of 20 years, it's so good to at least hear that this direction is being looked at and we're getting the results that it should. Practical education, direct education with structure, with disciplines around assessment is the only way to go. And at least we're starting to talk about it and we're seeing the results. That's the big one. We're seeing the results.
And Alex, what about every election? We throw in another billion, maybe 5 billion, 8 billion. We were only perfecting the worst way to teach.
I know. And this isn't the first policy that's done this.
Yeah.
And you remember we all debated at the time, you and I pushed back amongst many, and there it is. The evidence is there. Let's move on. Let's admit we've made a mistake and let's get back to practical education.
Vikki, there are some progressive education boffins who should be banned from working in the sector forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't need to look much more further than at estimates in either in the upper house or in the Senate. And when you're watching them give their evidence, it is a huge wake-up call that we don't need to just change how we teach and get back to basics, but we need to have a serious look at the curriculum as well, what these kids are being taught. This entire idea that we're getting at the moment, which is that every new Australian that came to this country did so because they were invading it, is completely incorrect and completely wrong. And whenever I get a chance to talk to kids about this, it's like, look at these names. Why do you think we've got all these O'Connors and McPhees? Why do you think we had this huge surge of Irish during the 1850s, and then saying to them, well, and they have no idea because they're being told, all these people came and they stole this land off the Aboriginal people, when in reality what occurred is our first lot of people here were really unwilling immigrants, and the second lot, and ever since then, have been fleeing something worse than a prison colony.
It's very true. It's very true. Now, the economic woes facing this country are stark and inescapable. I started listing them today and I was going to kind of recite them for now, but the list got too long. Let me sum it up. Our living standards are falling further. That's the worst part. Our debt is steeper. Government spending has upset recovery. And Alex, the government has some explaining to do, or maybe it's time to kick them right out of office.
Well, they're already in explaining mode and it's not working. 27.5% is government spending of our economic output. And so this next election is going to be about big government versus small government. And the cycle continues, Chris. We were just talking about NAPLAN. There's just another policy spend. If you're going to build a public service, and they've certainly beefed up nursing, which is a good thing, you've got to cut back in other areas. You can't just keep building the public service. You build a public service to some ridiculous level, you're moving into communism. We've got to fund the whole country through public service. We need the private enterprise to be driving forward. Even with housing at the moment, it's crazy. The amount of red tape to build a block of units is insane. That's where they need to be working for everyday people. Yeah,
true. Anthony Albanese splashed out $62,000 on flowers at a musical performance for world leaders at a summit in Melbourne earlier this year, Vikki. Documents supplied to the federal opposition through Freedom of Information requests show the PM's office spent $18,000 on the flowers alone. Now, when you're in government, no matter what the state of the economy, they don't pull their heads in like you and I do.
No, they don't do that at all. And what annoys me about this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? We can't FOI every single purchase that they make. So what we are seeing here is this is emblematic of the other spending which is occurring, which you don't know about.
Yeah.
And
tip of the iceberg. You could just imagine what we would face. See, this is why the Doge, I am a big fan of the Doge, bring in Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, put them up at a swanky hotel and let them cut a swathe through our public service.
Absolutely. I mean, Alex is right. It's got to be about slashing red tape, allowing businesses to do business, allow farmers to farm, allow us to go and do this stuff without this endless red and green tape, which is what we're getting at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. A magistrate launched into a fiery tirade about social media, saying he doesn't understand it and we used to have thick skin back in my day. This is like you and I, Alex, our conversations off air. Magistrate Michael Barker was presiding over a case involving a podcaster's episode on a former reality television star. Now, the podcaster is alleged to have upset the star in her So Dramatic podcast by publishing her address and therefore breaching an AVO. Magistrate Barco said the ban on social media for under 16s was fantastic, and instead of being on the internet, kids should get out there and kick a ball. Alex, they were far simpler times, were they not?
They certainly were, but look, because this is your last show, I'm going to announce a new award, Magistrate of the Year. I mean, fantastic commentary from a magistrate. We're so used to the political correctness. Look, they shouldn't have published the address. Okay, I'm good with that. But the fact is that kids have lost the art of play. And what made some of the great entrepreneurs is that they played in their backyard. And I do apply the test when our parents said to us, life is much more complex now than it was in my day. I try and apply that test, but we're in crazy times. We're in where people can't determine their gender or actually get to change it every 5 minutes. It's a really complex environment. And for a magistrate in that frame to actually make a common sense comment, bring it on. Magistrate of the Year.
Pare it back to the basics. Magistrate of the Year, I love it. Vikki, publishing a home address is a bit much, but you've got young kids. How are you going to stop them having a device addiction?
Yeah, I looked at that case and I did think, it was over the top, but he is awesome. And he's done, Magistrate Barker has come out on a whole, and showed common sense on a whole bunch of stuff, like chipping those kids for taking too many drugs at music festivals, just being like, what's wrong with the music, guys? Like... But yeah, keeping them off devices is literally the worst, most difficult thing. It's like they just pull my phone out of my pocket and stuff. Like I think that what I try to do mostly is keep them outside. You know, motorbikes, and I know there'll be people there going, well, that's not very safe, but it's great. You know, it's so good for their coordination, and you know, for their sense of autonomy and their sense of responsibility. So it's just staying outside, going on adventures, and actually connecting with them as well. But in terms of keeping them off devices, I just think it is my greatest challenge. It is really, really hard, and sometimes it really gets to me. And that's why that social media bill was such a massive disappointment in how the government handled that, because it's not actually going to help us with any of this at all.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter. We have one YouTube account, and that's what I use to access federal parliament and the federal court and state parliaments around the country. They can get on it, and they are not very good at writing yet, and boom, they're into stuff that you can't believe.
Yeah, it'll be ineffectual. You know, it's one thing to have a rule, you've got to be able to police the rule. Two quick ones before I let you go. Ukrainians in Australia have called on Foreign Minister Penny Wong to shut down the Sydney consulate housing Russian agent Semyon Boykov following revelations the Australian-born man paid a viral account on X to spread pro-Trump disinformation during the recent US election. CNN claims that the owner of a viral account at AlphaFox78 on X was paid $100 to post a fake video that falsely claimed Haitian immigrants were engaging in voting fraud in the swing state of Georgia in the recent US election. Mr. Boykov is dodging an arrest warrant, by the way, for allegedly assaulting a 76-year-old man at a pro-Ukraine rally at Sydney's Town Hall in 2023. The Semyon Boykov story is so bizarre, Alex, don't you think?
How could you not think? And this link between consulates and weirdo stories, whether it was an Assange thing for a decade or this.
Yes.
I mean, there's something going wrong in consulates. I don't know whether they're the place to go if you want a weird story. But seriously, there's no way anyone's going to shut that down. But who knows what the truth is? I mean, it's just, you know.
My feeling is we get too carried away about trying to get the truth on X. We all know that most of what we read is not the truth. Get over it. All right, I want to raise this one. It's probably the most important story that we have tonight. outraged Australians are vowing to boycott Coles over the supermarket's use of a controversial cattle feed supplement that aims to lower greenhouse gases. Now, Coles announced last year that some beef suppliers would expand the use of bovea in cattle feed after 2 trials found the supplement lowered methane emissions. Vikki, you're on the land, you're across the detail of this. How are graziers responding to what is just an absolute disgraceful role being played by Coles to change the nature of the planet?
This is killing us, and this will kill us. Like, we, in terms of your regular farmers who they're not corporate supermarket farms, for them, this is going to be, the issue here is going to be, right now they're trying to force it on us through the food chain, but next they're going to try and legislate it or regulate it and make it an issue that all farmers have to do that, or for a farmer like myself, for example, to sell to Coles, I would have to have a methane suppressant in the animal. Now, the issue with this is I think there's serious animal welfare concerns.
Yes.
About there's a couple of different ways of doing it. The one that they're using is it's a feed additive, which means that they're not out on the paddock. They're not out like behind me grazing. These guys are crushed into an environment where they don't have access to lucerne or clover or ryegrass. The only thing they've got access to is a box in front of them which has this stuff in it. Then the alternative to that is they use suppositories, which are very large, where you have to physically put the steer or the calf in a crush.
Oh, great. So much for animal welfare.
Insert a tablet bigger than my arm inside its rectum for the purposes of disrupting its normal digestive system. You know, ruminants have 4 stomachs. The methane is a natural part of that. And the other issue here too is the fact that methane, the largest source of methane, actually comes from the globe's wetlands. It doesn't come from domestic cattle herds. And like, why aren't you going out and trying to put these massive supplements up every feral goat's bum? Why aren't you out there trying to deal with our feral problem and put it in there? Like, it's insane to me.
It's insane. You're exactly right. I presume you're writing about this for your column on Saturday, are you?
Yes, I am.
Good.
Because it is Coles Chemical Cattle. It's a poem about monopolisation on beef, and that is what it is. It's got the same marketing strategy as Intermittent Power, which is first we're going to make you feel really guilty about the product, then here's this other product which is going to make you feel less guilty, and then here we go, we're going to come in and we're going to ask you, the taxpayer, for subsidies for it as well. And this is exactly what happened with intermittents and renewables, whatever you want to call them. Nothing renewable about them. And this is the next side of that, which is we're going to start with these methane emission reduction supplements. I mean, one of these drugs, one of the chemicals in this feed is so poisonous that people aren't allowed to use it without gloves.
Right.
And
it's an outrage. It is just an outrage, and it's a story we need to pick up and run with hard in 2025. I've run out of time talking about 2025. We won't see each other until then. Have a great Christmas, Alex Malley, Vikki Campion, and thank you very much for your contribution on the program.
Happy New Year. Thank you so much for having us.
Fantastic. Alex Malley, Vikki Campion, our news panellist tonight. More coming up right after this. Good to have your company this evening. Well, it's been an incredible year in the United States political scene. We've had a couple of assassination attempts on Donald Trump, of course. We've had a change in Democrat nominee, Joe Biden, being convinced by the likes of Barack Obama and George Clooney to step aside. We had this victory from Donald Trump for the ages. It's been amazing. Let's cross to Washington, D.C. for the very final time in 2024 and look at what's going on in the last few days through the eyes of independent Washington journalist and host of America Happens News, Corinne Cliford. Corinne, thank you very much for your time.
I am so grateful to be here tonight, Chris. There is so much happening in the United States of America and in our politics. It's getting really more interesting.
Well, more interesting, and of course, it usually has something to do with the president. Let's start with Joe Biden, who is literally falling asleep at the wheel. Let's take a look at this.
Important opportunities for Africa's development in sectors such as agriculture, renewable energy, digital transformation, trade and logistics along the corridor. Tanzania is already undertaking.
Look, the poor coot, I think I would have fallen asleep as well.
I mean, basically, Biden has no power. People are already understanding that Trump is the president of the free world, and it doesn't even matter what Biden does anymore, does it?
You're probably right, but it does indicate that the Democratic Party had very little option but to go the way of Kamala Harris, and then we know that it fell over badly for them. Democratic strategist James Carville made some interesting comments on MSNBC overnight. He said that Tucker Carlson holds more power in this Trump administration. Watch this.
So Steve Bannon does not drive this. One person is driving this, I'll promise you, and it's Tucker Carlson. Okay, Tucker's an old friend of mine, and there's nothing that I see.
Still friends?
We hadn't talked to each other in a while, but I'm not. We were friends, but I'm not. But everything that I see is the same thing I heard in the green room in 2002. Okay, and J.D. Vance, Don Jr., Kash Patel was Tucker's business partner. I'm just telling you what's out there, okay? And Tucker is 40 times more clever than Steve Bannon. He's 40 times more connected. He's also very connected with Elon Musk and everything else. And he's a very bright man who should not be underrated. But I think he has more influence in this current administration.
What are your thoughts on what James Carville had to say, Corinne? Because I find it difficult to believe him at times. I think he makes up a lot of the stuff that he talks about on MSNBC. However, we do know that Tucker is very close to Trump.
Tucker Carlson is one of the closest people to Trump. And I think that's really important because where is Tucker Carlson right now? He's in Russia. He's in the Soviet Union. He's on the side of Putin right now, which I think is so intriguing because basically Tucker Carlson's proving that our mainstream media in the United States of America lies about what's really happening in the world, and especially the fact that the deep state in the United States, they're using NATO to really try to start World War III before President Trump gets inaugurated on January 20th. And so Tucker Carlson is in Russia right now, which I think is incredible. It's fine. It's great if Tucker Carlson is close to President Trump. Why would that even be a problem?
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, the CEO of United Healthcare was shot dead outside a hotel in New York last night. The video of what occurred is quite confronting. Officials are calling it a targeted attack. What can you tell us?
That's a 100% targeted attack. You can tell by the footage that they released to the public. I think that this gentleman either owed a gambling debt or he really pissed someone off in a bad business deal. We don't know yet, and I don't focus on news like this, so I'm not going to investigate this. It'll all come to light soon, but that was a targeted murder.
Yeah, right in front of people's eyes. CNN has reported that an Aussie-dwelling Russian, the Aussie Cossack, paid a Twitter account to spread fake news about voting fraud in the United States election. The US Supreme Court, look, before I move on, I just wanted to mention the fact that I've had something to do with this bloke and his story is quite bizarre. Whether he's made things up on Twitter or not, why do people get so upset about what they read on Twitter, almost like it's some kind of scientific journal?
Well, I think that there is a lot of adversity out there. The deep state wants to get rid of Elon Musk because Twitter, even though I still get censored on X, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, is definitely a free speech platform. When I get censored, I contact direct Elon Musk team and tell them I got censored again. The bottom line is that there is so much real news on a platform called Rumble, and there's other platforms where you can get real news.
Yeah.
But X is the key right now because Elon Musk is so close to President Trump. I think Elon Musk is closer to President Trump than Tucker Carlson is right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. The US Supreme Court is determining the future of gender-affirming care at the moment in US versus Scrametti. What are the possible outcomes here? Gee, it'd be good for a little bit of common sense for a change on this subject.
I think that the United States of America has an incredible Supreme Court right now, and I don't want to predict, but I know that they're going to be on the right side of history. What they really want to do with this particular Supreme Court in the United States is take things out of the federal level. They want to throw things back into the state rule. So basically, I think that what they're going to do is say the states have to choose what's going to happen. So that's really what they've been doing this whole time. I pray that this Supreme Court gets stronger and stronger with our side, with our conservative side, and I hope that happens. I think it will under Trump.
This is a crucial case. Let's just hope that they side on a degree of common sense. And US Congress determined that COVID-19 was likely leaked from a Wuhan lab. We spoke about this on the program a couple of days ago. Is anyone like, Anthony Fauci, for instance, in trouble when Trump takes the White House, do you think?
Yes, 100%. As a matter of fact, the Biden regime is discussing giving Dr. Fauci immunity, which would give him immunity on the federal level. But if there is a really good Republican governor or someone in a Republican state who wants to persecute and prosecute Dr. Fauci, they can. And a presidential pardon does not cover you in the United States of America on the state level.
Interesting. Now, I've got to leave it there, but I do want to mention to my viewers what an incredible, courageous person you are. You've broken your foot in the last 24 hours and you're still front up for our cross today. Thank you very much for that.
Anytime. You're one of the greatest newsmen in the world. Thank you so much, Chris. Have a beautiful holiday.
Good on you. Same to you. Merry Christmas to you, Corinne. Corinne Cliford from Washington, D.C. Great to have her on the program. More to come right after this. Paul MacNamara is my next guest, and he has a very interesting but troubling tale for us tonight. Paul is an educator in juvenile detention centres and has written about the youth justice system in a number of books, with the latest, Inside Juvie, released just yesterday. The book follows the journey of educator Tommy, who's launched into the dark and deeply disturbing world of juvenile detention. Now, Tommy encounters kids from all walks of life, kids who have never had access to 3 meals a day, violent inmates and sex offenders who brag about their conquests. Believe me, you will never see the youth justice system the same way again. Paul MacNamara, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
I've got to say from the start, there are some very twisted tales in the book, and I presume they haven't been embellished. They are simply from your own experiences, right?
Yeah, it's a fictionalised account, but it is based on my lived experience as a teacher working in the juvenile detention centres for 10 years. And it's all the characters are based on characters that I met and put together and made into a narrative.
This is an extremely disturbing place to work, isn't it?
It's a tricky space to work in. As a teacher, you could imagine if you get all the kids who get kicked out of all the other schools and they all get put into the one classroom, that's what you're confronted with. You've got a lot of kids who've got a history of trauma and bad experiences of being in school in the first place. So they're the kind of kids that you have to deal with. So as a teacher, it definitely has its challenges, that's for sure.
One thing that emerges from the book is the fact that there are some inmates in there, and I don't know whether you want to call them inmates, but children, for instance, who don't want to be there, are traumatised by being there, but others seem to revel in their badness. Am I right?
Yeah, well, you get those kids who are, little gangsters, and when you do have them in the classroom as well, and when you do have all those kind of kids together in a detention centre, there is that kind of thing of, I'll be the biggest gangster in the room and I'll out gangster you kind of thing. So there are the kids who just see it as an occupational hazard of doing time in juvenile detention. But there are the kids who, it can be a respite for them from their outside world. As you were saying before, it gives them 3 meals a day, a hot shower, clean linen, and also adults who actually ask after their well-being. So for them, it can be a relief from what they're experiencing on the outside.
How do you, as an educator, motivate them to be educated?
Yeah, well, it's strange because one thing you encounter a lot too is a lot of these kids don't really have goals, and they see it that their future is going to be a life of crime, where you have other families where, maybe the family occupation is being dentists or nurses or teachers. These guys, can think that crime is the normal pathway for them. So as a teacher, you try to show them that there are other avenues for them. Most of them don't have very much experience of a lot of life skills. So you try to show them that, try to show them different ways that, they could lead their lives. They're still young. They've still got a lot that they could do. So as a teacher, you do that and you build on those relationships. I talk about in the book, and, a story I would like to relate is that there was one kid who I watched over, a number of years from when he was 12 to 18. And when he was leaving, he put his arm around me because I was a constant in his life, and he was saying goodbye. And he did say to me, the first time I ever met you, I wanted to break a chair over your head. So that's progress, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose. Some of the crimes committed by these kids in the book are abhorrent sexual abuse. For people like yourself, for staff who work in that environment, do you put that twisted attitude to another person's privacy down to their upbringing? And what part of their upbringing enabled them to cross that line?
Yeah, that's interesting, Chris, because, you will find when you peel back that they will have a history of abuse themselves often. And, I encountered things I'd never heard of before. Like one thing was reactive attachment disorder. And that's a disorder that happens when a child cries and no adult comes and comforts them. And after a while, they realise no one is coming, and the baby stops crying. And when someone grows up like that, they have a detachment and, no empathy, and it wasn't shown to them. So it's hard for them to understand it as well. Research will show that a lot of abuse survivors become perpetrators as well. That's just that cycle.
I often talk about adult prisons as colleges for criminality. Would you say that in some ways that's exactly what juvie is?
Yeah, well, there is that thing of if you put all your bad eggs in the one basket, what do you hope to achieve from that? And as I was saying earlier, a teacher is like a pro-social model that they don't otherwise see. And they do learn from each other, learn tricks of the trade. And I suppose the other thing that for myself is you have your wins, but you also see that young kids come in, little fellas, and they're cheeky and, they're little firecrackers, but this sort of still a child and there's something comical about it. And then by the time they get into 18, you can see their eyes have changed and, they've got harder.
Yeah. You tell a story about a solicitor arguing against locking up young children as they said it will only increase the chances of poor emotional development and adverse mental health in adulthood. But then you hear about cases where kids are dragged in and out of court dozens of times. It's hard to find and determine what the answer is for their future, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very difficult. It is a real balancing act, and I can see how complex it is for the courts and for the police and for the judges to figure out what is the next right step for those kids. There is this revolving door of the people being incarcerated over and over again. And there doesn't seem to be the diversionary programs on the outside to give them some alternative to that. It's not an easy fix.
It's not an easy fix, but we can do a lot more, can't we?
Yeah, I think for sure. The latest Australian figures show that 80% of kids who get locked up will return within 12 months. That's if you're running a business like that where whatever product you were producing was coming back within 12 months, I don't think you'd last that long.
Yeah, it's not the result that you'd be looking for. Inside Juvie is the name of your book. All the very best with its sale, Paul, and thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. As well as it being a heavy story, it's also a good read, I believe, and a good Christmas gift for people because it'll answer some questions and give you an authentic view of what it's like inside there.
Yeah, so true. Paul MacNamara, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. See ya.
Well, for city slickers such as myself, we've been hearing a lot from friends and family in the bush about how good the season has been this year. I lived in Malley and Parks in New South Wales as a young bloke, and mates from there tell me what a bumper harvest they're involved in at the moment. But Australia is a huge landmass, as we know, and there are parts of the country that haven't got rain when they needed it this year, and they have to harvest, and they have no harvest to crow about. No less than 3 Australian states have some districts classified as experiencing drought conditions, and they need assistance. Who's there for them again? The people from Rural Aid, of course, and they in turn need our help. Let's have a quick chat with John Warlters, who's the CEO of Rural Aid and based out of Brisbane. Good evening to you, John. Thanks for your time.
Good evening, Chris. How are you? And you're right, those Parks and Malley having a fantastic time of it right now, and good luck to them as well. It's long overdue. Yeah, long overdue, yeah. She's a big country, you know, girt by sea and all of that. And there are districts which have had a poor year for weather and yield, like in South Australia, West Australia, New South Wales, 3 states, right? Absolutely. You're spot on with WA, very, very dry in that bottom southwest corner of the state earlier this year. South Australia right now is probably a very big focal point for Rural Aid. We've just had the state government down there announce an $18 million assistance package, which is essentially validation of what we've been saying at Rural Aid for some months now, that it is very, very dry, lowest rainfall on record. And then you go across into Victoria, and similarly, there's large parts of that state also that are very dry and just waiting for that break to come.
So you've got your famous Buy a Bale program underway now. Remind my viewers how it all works.
Our Buy a Bale is an incredible campaign that raised millions and millions of dollars of assistance for farming families when drought was at its absolute worst, not so many years ago. And it's everyday Aussies. It's their chance to make a really meaningful difference by doing exactly what it says, buy a bale, make a donation to Rural Aid, and that helps us to buy fodder, to feed livestock, to get it to those places that are dry. But it also helps us do a whole lot more in terms of counselling and mental wellbeing support, and deliver very basic things like emergency household drinking water when the tanks run dry. All the fundamentals of life, Chris.
So how are you coordinating this? If it's happening in various states, you obviously have, you know, state and territory headquarters, and you're moving bales of hay from, you know, lush areas into those that are suffering from drought, do you?
We do, Chris, and that's one of the really important parts of what's been announced in South Australia is there's some assistance made available for organisations like Rural Aid to help us cover the cost of that freight, because it is a very large component. It's challenging to source hay when there are drought circumstances happening. It means you need to go a little bit further afield to get it, and then pay more to get it to those people who need the help and support. So we think that's a really important addition to the assistance that's been announced. But it's an ongoing process, Chris.
Your entire career has been dedicated to the bush in various roles. Farmers are very reluctant recipients of charity. You'd know that very well, wouldn't you?
Oh, Chris, when we offer a helping hand, they inevitably point us to the neighbour down the road and say, can you help them? They need it a little bit more than we do. And our response typically is, well, you know what, we've got them covered as well, but we're here to help and make sure that you're okay in the first instance. They're stoic, they're proud, they're incredibly resilient. But all that aside, from time to time, they do need a little bit of help and support. And right now is one of those times.
So where can you send my viewers to help you?
Oh, we'd love it if they jump onto the Rural Aid website, which is ruralaid.org.au.
Okay. Well, we could at least do that as we come up to Christmas time. It's a time for giving, and what a worthy cause it is. John Warlters, thank you very much for your time, and well done on what you do.
Oh, thank you, Chris, and a big cheerio to all your mates out in the bush there as well, Parks and Moree and all those other places too.
Great spots indeed. The CEO of Rural Aid there, John Warlters, who's based in Brisbane. It's now time for your space. These are the emails you've been sending us throughout 2024 on some of the subjects we've been covering. Now, on the subject that we covered at the start of the week about the collapse of various investigations and prosecutions against our SAS soldiers who fought in Afghanistan, Nathan Bolton spoke to us on the program, and Jack Dice wrote this in an email: leave our SAS alone. They only carry out orders from above. Put the guys giving the orders on trial. Another viewer on Gerry Harvey's interview from the previous night. Gerry Harvey's comments are a breath of fresh air. Whoever thought issues like The Voice and much of the renewable rubbish would not be popular? Add to that the cost of living, surging energy prices, government spending and all the broken promises. Labor has already added $100 billion to budget spending in barely 2 years, and a migration program of over 500,000 as well. When will it end? Thank you so much for all your contributions to your space in 2024. It is always terrific to gauge what you think about the biggest issues and stories that we face. And that's it for me for this week and this year on ADH TV. I will be back, promise, in January of 2025, and looking forward to it. In fact, this digital news network looks set for an incredible year, 2025. I can't say too much just now, but we'll have some very exciting new affiliations and some new programs as well. For now, thank you to all the crew at ADH TV who've accepted me into the network and worked so hard to get our shows to air each and every night. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you have enjoyed watching Chris Smith tonight as well. I hope you have a fabulous Merry Christmas and an even better New Year. See you in 2025. Good night.